Hello everyone, it is Therapist Yani here, and in this presentation, I am going to talk about sensory processing disorder. As for today's discussion, I am going to talk about introduction, types, symptoms, causes, effects, and co-occurring disorders that happens with sensory processing disorder. Now, first, let's take a look about the meaning of sensory processing disorder, or SPD. SPD is a neurological disorder where individuals give abnormal responses to sensory information that the individual perceives. SPD, in a way, is difficult to integrate information from the senses. This may cause the individual to be overwhelmed, resulting in confusing behavior. Sensory processing problems are now considered to be a symptom of autism. In psychology, sensory processing issues is a term that describes a collection of challenges relating to senses. As you may know or not know, SPD has three different patterns. First, sensory modulation disorder. Second, sensory discrimination disorder. And lastly, sensory based motor disorder. So, as for the first pattern, which is sensory modulation disorder, the subtypes of sensory modulation disorder include sensory overresponsive or oversensitive, sensory underresponsive or undersensitive, and also sensory craving, or also known as sensory seeking. This sensory modulation disorder is a difficulty regulating responses to sensory stimuli. First, let's take a look at the oversensitive one. Oversensitive is the predisposition to respond too much, too soon, or far too long to sensory stimuli most people find quite tolerable. Underresponsive is predisposition to be unaware of sensory stimuli, to have a delay before responding, responses are muted or response with less intensity compared to the average person. And lastly, sensory seeking driven to obtain sensory stimulation, but getting the stimulation results in disorganization and does not satisfy the drive for more. Well, the next pattern is sensory discrimination disorder, SDD. SDD is a difficulty interpreting subtle qualities of objects, places, people, or other environments. We have eight different subtypes of SDD. The first one is the first one is auditory DD, difficulty interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli that is heard. Next one is visual DD, difficulty determining or interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli that is seen. Tactile DD, difficulty determining or interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli that is felt on the skin or interpreting higher level visual or spatial characteristics of touch. Vestibular DD, difficulty interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli experienced through movement of the body through space or against gravity. Proprioceptive DD, difficulty determining or interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli experienced through use of the muscles and joints. Gustatory DD, difficulty determining interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli that is tasted. Olfactory DD, difficulty in determining or interpreting characteristics of sensory stimuli that is smelled. And lastly, interoception, difficulty interpreting stimulation from internal organs which may not feel need to use the toilet or may have frequent somatic complaints such as stomach ache. And the last pattern is sensory-based motor disorder. Sensory-based motor disorder is a difficulty with balance, motor coordination, and the performance of skilled non-habitual or and habitual motor tasks. So we have two different subtypes under SBMD, which is first postural disorder. Next one is dyspraxia. Postural disorder is impaired perception of position of body position, which is poorly developed movement patterns that depend on core stability, thus appears weak and or has poor endurance. Dyspraxia is difficulty thinking of, planning, and or executing skilled movements, especially novel movement patterns. The symptoms of sensory processing disorder will vary from person to person in both type and severity. Some individuals with sensory processing disorder will be overly responsive to stimuli, while others may not respond at all. For example, one person may scream in pain when gently touched, while another person may be incapable of feeling pain at all. Different symptoms that may present across the spectrum of SPD severity may include First, behavioral symptoms, which sudden aggressive outbursts, throwing tantrums, has a difficult time engaging in conversations or play, excessively high or excessively low activity levels, blinks, squints or rubs one's eyes frequently, resists certain grooming activities, and lastly, illegible handwriting. The next symptom may include physical symptoms such as impaired coordination, bumping into things, overly sensitive to or incapable of sensing touch, abnormally high or low pain threshold, fine and or gross motor delays, avoids eating certain foods due to texture or consistency. The third symptom is cognitive symptoms, include speech and language delays, inability to remain focused, poor attention span, overly sensitive to volume or frequency of sounds, and lastly becomes easily overstimulated in group settings. And the last symptom is psychosocial. Psychosocial symptoms may also include low sense of self-worth, onset of anxiety, onset of depression, difficulty developing a sense of independence. Like most neurological disorders, a specific cause of sensory processing disorder has not been identified. While research efforts continue to thrive on the topic, most professionals in the field believe that the onset of SPD is the result of a combination of varying factors, including genetic, physical, and environmental. Now, first, let's take a look at the genetic causes. Preliminary research suggests that sensory processing disorder can be inherited, although no genetic markers have yet been identified. Next is physical causes. Experiments have shown that individuals who experience sensory processing dysfunction have abnormal brain activity when exposed to certain stimuli. In a study conducted at the University of California, San Francisco, researchers found that children with SPD have differences in their brain structure that are quantifiable, providing a biological basis for the onset of this disease. And lastly, environmental cause. Professionals in the field believe that there are a number of environmental factors that can play a role in determining whether or not someone will develop sensory processing disorder. The most prominent of such environmental factors include not being exposed to appropriate amounts of stimulation during crucial developmental stages. The risk factors of sensory processing disorder may include having been understimulated or institutionalized during crucial periods of neurological development, being exposed to drugs while in utero, having food allergies, and lastly, having certain developmental delays or neurological disorders. Let's take a look at the effects of sensory processing disorder in everyday life. While successful treatment options are available for sensory processing disorder, many individuals are misdiagnosed or remain undiagnosed and therefore do not receive appropriate treatment. The long-term effects of untreated SPD may include difficulty developing and maintaining significant interpersonal relationships, academic or occupational failure, unemployment, social isolation, drastically low self-esteem, and also suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Next, let's take a look at the sensory processing disorder and co-occurring disorders. The presence of SPD can occur alongside various other conditions as well, including autism spectrum disorder, anxiety disorder, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, intellectual disability, learning disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. That is all from me. Thank you.